Welcome to the House of Truth. Today we're talking about leaving Sinai. How the children, if you remember, the congregation of Israel arrived at Sinai on the third day of the third month of the first day, and when Moses went up was Shavuot, Pentecost was the day he actually went up to get the law, not the day not the day he came down with it, as we demonstrated. That was 40 days later. And after that they had the golden calf incident. He had to go back and get another one, get another set, and get some more commandments. He comes down, and then they got busy with some of those, and they built the tabernacle. They built the ark, the house, the stone tablets that had the words that they themselves had heard God speak audibly, but they said make it stop when they got down to number 10 about you shall not covet. That's just simply desiring other people's stuff. You're not to do that. And they couldn't take it no more at that point. The words they did heard were written in those commandments. Those were put in the ark. The ark was built to house the words they heard. They were written on stone by the finger of God. The tabernacle was built to house the ark, the Holy of Holies being where it was. And then we saw how the priests were prepared to carry out the various rituals of the tabernacles. And last week we looked at how the Levites were prepared. Well, we saw how the Levites were prepared, I should say, how they were prepared to do their role of tearing down, moving, and setting up the tabernacle, among other duties they'd have, which will become clearer later. Then we saw the priests were consecrated, and during that, and then we looked at how at all the wickedness that was going on with that pillar of fire by night, cloud by day, right there in their visible sight, including worshiping animals in substitute for their own children to devils. This was all brought up. This was all brought out in the scripture. I mean, just total rebellion against God the entire time. Finally, we talked about the Levites being consecrated and how the camp would be organized, and it would form a giant, and how it forms a giant cross. And we'll see some more evidence. It's organized in the manner the Lord showed me, the manner I've said, and you can map it out yourself, and you'll see it forms a giant cross. And there's some more evidence in today's lesson. Now that everything's ready, this mobile city of 3.5 million people, or 3 million to 3.5 million people, is ready to roll out and get moving. Everything's in place for it to do it. So now it's time to leave Sinai and start heading towards the promised land. So today we're going to talk about leaving Sinai, and which is a big change for everybody, and the right way to deal with changes in our lives. And I should also say the wrong way. Now, we're going to begin here in Exodus 40, verse 36 to 38, the last verses of Exodus. When the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the children of Israel went forward unto all their journeys. When the cloud was not taken up, the journey not till the day that it was taken up. The cloud of the Lord was upon the tabernacle by day and fire by night in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journey. Okay, until they get to the promised land, the tabernacle's there. This fire again, this cloud they could see, the visible presence of God. Cloud by day, fire by night. It's right there in their sight. And so as long as it's sitting over the tabernacle, it's over the tabernacle. Remember, God said be in their presence. God would be in their presence through the tabernacle. It's actually sitting over the Holy of Holies. We looked at over the ark, where the ark is located in the Holy of Holies. Well, now when it lifts up, they know it's time to move. When it comes back down, they know they're at the resting place. Now, this is explained a little further little more details here in Numbers 9. So we begin to look at those in verses 15 through 18. On the day that the tabernacle was reared up, the cloud covered the tabernacle. Name of the tent of testimony. And either there was upon the tabernacle, as it were, the appearance of fire till morning. And when the cloud was taken up from the tabernacle, then after that the children of Israel journeyed. And in the place where the cloud abode, there the children of Israel pitched their tents. At the command of the Lord, the children of Israel journeyed. And at the command of the Lord, they pitched as long as the cloud abode above the tabernacle, abode upon the tabernacle, they rested their tents. Okay, so notice the tabernacle moved there the day it was reared up. And we mentioned that when we talked about setting up the tabernacle. Okay, so the testimony being the tablets that's actually in the ark of the testimony. So as I mentioned, it's centered right on that, the words of God. It's centered on the word of God. And it changes from cloud. It's a cloud by day, fire by night. Now, when it was taken up, they journeyed and they followed it. And remember, we saw before the angel of the Lord was moving, was in the cloud by day and fire by night. So the angel of the Lord is going before them, as the Lord said, and in this cloud, they can't see him, but they can see the cloud. He's in the middle of it, going forward, and he's the one that's guiding them. They don't really have, they don't have any GPS or nothing. And Moses wasn't lost or confused out in the wilderness. The Malach Adonai, the angel of the Lord, which we discussed is Messiah, is the one that led them. And notice how at the command of the Lord they're doing this. So again, they're not deciding; the Lord's deciding. He decides when they go, when they stay, where they stay, how long they stay. Now we continue on in Numbers 9, verse 19 through 23. And when the cloud tarried long upon the tabernacle many days, then the children of Israel kept the charge of the Lord and journeyed not. But so it was when the cloud was a few days upon the tabernacle, according to the command of the Lord, they abode in their tents. According to the command of the Lord, they journeyed. So it was in the cloud abode from evening to evening, the cloud evening to morning, and the cloud was taken in the morning. Then they journeyed by day or by night. That the cloud was taken up, they journeyed. Now, whether there were 2 days or a month or a year, the cloud tarried upon the tabernacle, and remaining thereon, children of Israel abode in their tents and journeyed not. When it was taken up, they journeyed. At the command of the Lord, they rested in their tents. At the command of the Lord, they journeyed. They kept the charge of the Lord at the command of the Lord by the hand of Moses. The first thing I want you to know is they kept this is one commandment they kept of God. But honestly, they're out in the wilderness. They don't know where they're at. They're not familiar with it like Moses and Jethro, who joined him, as we saw when we talked about Jethro. He's joined him. He's eyes for them. He's a guide to them. He's got some familiarity, but the rest of them, Moses has some from when he watched Jethro's sheep, watching his flocks all those years, flocks of sheep and goats. But the rest of them don't have a clue. So they could try to go head somewhere. They don't really know where anything is. They could maybe say, well, try to watch straight east, but they know the Dead Sea's over there. Maybe they're planning go to the Dead Sea and go around it, but they don't know where water is. They don't know any of these essential things to actually go anywhere. And this is probably the main reason they actually kept the charge of the Lord in this one particular case, because they really didn't have a lot of options to not keep it. So tells there's only 2 reasons people ever obey God or anyone, their parents, whoever. One is fear of consequence of disobedience, and the other is love for the person that gave the commandment. And they're not doing this out of love; they're doing it out of fear of the consequences of not doing it. So that's why you see this obedience in this one matter. We've seen so much disobedience in some of the others. So now notice the cloud boat. They took up in the morning. They journeyed. Okay, so it's going up in the morning and they journey, whereas by day or night. So if it went up in the middle of the night, remember the cloud has the appearance of fire at night, and if it went up in the middle of the night, they had to get in the middle of the night. Nothing convenient about it. And notice when they went somewhere, they may only be a couple days there, maybe a month, or they may be a year. They don't know how long they're going to be there. And that's the way it is when you're following God. He may have you literally move around. You don't know how long you're going to be anywhere. Me and my wife moved 17 times in 5 years. Sometimes really short, sometimes really long. And then my career, sometimes I left at the lead of God. I left a steady job working for the state, to go into contracting, software contracting as a software engineer. Made more money while I was working, but sometimes I work somewhere just a short while. Sometimes for almost a decade, one place. Eventually living working for one place almost for a decade. But I didn't know if it was going to be 6 days or 6 years. And that's kind of what's going on with them here. But they're keeping this commandment. Again, I'm going to stress that. Really, if you think about it, they don't have any choice. That's probably the only reason they're not doing this, because they've broken all these other ones about not having idols and sexual morality and stuff, as we saw a couple lessons back when we looked at the trouble at Sinai, all these terrible things that were going on right there in the presence of God, right as the tabernacle was being built, so on and so forth. Even after hearing the voice of God and all the wonders of Egypt. Okay, so now that's how they know when to move, and but there's some more that's going to be needed, so they move in an orderly fashion, and this is what's going to come out for us here in Numbers 10, verses 1 through 4. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, Take you 2 trumpets of silver, and of a whole piece you shall make them, that you may use them for calling the assembly and for the journeying of their camps. And when they shall blow them, all the assembly shall assemble themselves to you at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. If they blow with but one trumpet, then the princes, which are the head of thousands, shall gather themselves to thee. Okay, so notice they got 2 trumpets of silver, katsura, and the katsura are long, like you may have seen these movies, like maybe an old cartoon or movie or something, where a king's being announced and they blow these long metal trumpets that don't got any keys or nothing, or whatever, to announce the arrival of the king. That's what we're talking about here. Okay, they're long silver trumpets like that, made of metal, silver. I mean, in this case, silver, and there now they got several ways. They got several ways to blow them. There's they if I remember correctly, there's Torah, which we'll talk about in a minute. The Torah. There's the Tekiah and the Tekiah Tegal. The Tekiah Tegal is what we're talking about here, which is a long blast. Okay, Tekiah means blast. Well, this is the Gadal means great blast. Okay, and this is just one long blow. Now, when they hear that, they know it's time to assemble. And I talked to this before. Notice when only one's blown, which would be the first trump, only those who go before them, their leaders, the prince, the head, those who go before are the only ones that are called up to meet the Lord. Remember, they're assembling as at the door of the tabernacle. They're being called up to meet the Lord. On the second trump, all the camp comes up to meet the Lord. Well, it's the same way. It's what Paul is referring to when he says on the first trump, the dead in Christ will rise. Those who preceded, those who are alive. They've already they're asked from the bodies to be present with the Lord. They're already with the Lord in one sense, but they went before. On the second trump, you get this long blast. The second trump, not with the shofar, mind you. It's the Katsura. It's actually a silver trumpet, not shofar, as people think. The rest of the camp comes. The rest of all those who are alive they're gonna meet the Lord. Where in the clouds? The meeting place to meet him. The meeting place for them is the door of the tabernacle, meaning probably the gate to the outer court. They can't actually go. They, there's some cases they might go into the courtyard, some cases, but they can't go to at the door. They can't go in the courtyard and be all scrunched around the altar and that kind of thing. It's some of the door of the tabernacle in this context is that gate on the east side. Remember, there's that large area there. It's empty. Well, that's for them to assemble. Okay, this large area of assembly on the east side. There's just Aaron, his priest, Aaron, his son, his two sons, and Moses camped over there. Most of it's a large area for them to assemble, as I mentioned last week. So in that same pattern we see here, I've talked about before, is shown, and this is why people think that last trump means the seventh trump of Revelation stuff. That's because they don't understand how God does things. Well, these things he does for us here are examples so we can understand future events. Okay, because God doesn't change; he operates the same way. Now we'll continue on in Numbers, down verse 5-7. We read the following about another use for these trumpets for the Katsasara. When you blow an alarm, and the camps that lay on the east part shall go forward. When you blow alarm the second time, the camps that lay on the south side shall take their journey. They shall blow an alarm for their journeys. When the congregation is gathered together, you shall blow an alarm. You shall blow, but shall not sound an alarm. Okay, this word blow an alarm, except is teruah. Teruah is the total duration is about the same for the long blast as the teruah, but the teruah is 9 short blasts, 3 little sets, and three triplets. And you might think of association with the Holy Spirit, 9 gifts, 9 fruits, and they're in little sets of 3 as well. So, but this is blowing the alarm. Now, notice that when you're gathering, you don't blow the alarm. Again, you blow the long blast. And if there's a second, you'll hear only one trumpet. The first trumpet, only those who go ahead go up. The second trumpet, everyone else goes up. First those who precede it, then those who follow. Okay, but this is Yom Teruah, is literally the day of alarming. People call it the Feast of Trumpets, but literally it's the day of alarming. Well, if the long blast for assembling, why a day of alarming? Because think about today, the alarms, sirens, everything goes off when there's some sort of disaster. This is the end will begin with this when they're taken out of the earth. Messiah says in Luke 21:36, plain as he can say, pray to worthy to escape all these things. In verse 34, he says, plain as you can read. The snare, why are they escaping? The snare will come upon all the earth. Read the passage, read the verse above it. Those are all in the tribulation. In the parallel passage, I think it's in Mark. There's a parallel passage in Mark 13, in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and it says plain as day. He actually calls it the tribulation. That's what they're escaping. Well, what happens as soon as they're escaped? The hammer's down. I mean, even the fact they just however many go or have just disappeared, it's going to cause alarm. So that's why it's called Yom Teruah, because it's the day of alarming for the world. It's the day of assembly for those who are watching and praying. And you may think, well, when's that going to occur? Well, Messiah tells us in Matthew 24:14 that when our job is done, when the gospel's been preached to every ethnic group, then the end will come. So the fact that there is a rapture, even the word rapture is a Latin word for for harpazo, which is what Paul plainly says. He actually uses that word in Corinthians about when we're gathered together in the cloud to meet with Messiah. We're going to meet and stand before him according to Messiah, according to Yeshua's own words in Luke 21:36. Well, where? We're going to meet him at the clouds, okay, the place of assembly. Okay. But what's not true is not every believer's going. Only the worthy are going, according to Luke 21:36. He gives believers a warning. Don't get caught up in everyday affairs of earth and get caught up in that and not be taking care of his business. Because only the worthy are going. Those who are busy about his business. And the other fallacy that's often taught about what most pre-trib rap people would believe would teach. It's a fallacy, is that it's imminent, it can happen anytime. No, it can't. We were given the job to bring the gospel to all the world, and he's not taking, and the end cannot begin till we finish our job. The next phase will not begin until this phase is finished. So that's all tied into this business here. I've discussed it before in previous lessons, and perhaps I'll discuss it again in a future lesson in a little more detail. But for this right here, what's happening with them, notice the camp that's on the east part still go forward. Well, remember, that's Judah's camp. Judah's, the ones under Judah's standard, and we'll see in a moment, they're behind each other when these camps are laid out. Outermost, and then the camps that follow Judah are behind him. So the whole column is now going to go. Now, if they're heading east, all they got to do is walk out forward. But if they're going to head west, say they got to walk all the way around either towards the north or the south. But I imagine towards the south because of the second time the south side goes, and get the very front position. And then the second time's blown, let them know it's ready, and the south's going to take. So that's an alarm, and that alarm means time to move. It also means it can indicate for sometimes in war or disaster. We'll talk about that in a minute. We'll talk about when the third type is blown here in a moment. Okay. So we're gonna sound so there's this alarm, and when the alarm, so there's one for assembly, one for the alarm. They can be put on the same day. They can occur closely together. The leaders can be called up to tell them what to do, or the assembly, or they could say, well, we're getting ready to leave, and assemble everyone, tell them we're getting ready to leave, and then blow the alarm, and then everyone gets back in their position, and each one has to take their camp down and get packed up and start moving in this order we just described about. And remember, it can happen day or night. As we previously saw, it literally says it can happen at night. It can be 3 a.m, and suddenly maybe this alarm's going off. There was no assembly, or perhaps the assembly happened first. Either way, it's at a time that only God knows. It's in the hands of the Father. He's the only one who knows when he's going to move upon the priest to move. They're going to blow those trumpets when they see the cloud rise up. Okay. Remember, they're up all night. They have to keep that fire going in the menorah has to be stayed lit continually as long as the holy place is standing. They'll know it's going to be put out when they're moving the menorah. And that's definitely because we saw it's all covered up in cloth. Now, let's continue on in Numbers 10 in verses verses 8 through 10 finish up about these Chatzorah, the silver trumpets. And here's what we remember: silver is associated with redemption. And again, who's being called up? Who's being called up when at the first and last trump? Those who've been redeemed by the Lamb. Now, let's continue on here, and here's what we see: the sons of Aaron, the priest, shall blow the trumpets. They shall be an ordinance forever throughout your generations. If you're going to warn your land against the enemy that oppress you, shall blow an alarm with the trumpets, and you shall be remembered for the Lord your God, and you shall be safe from your enemies. And in the day of gladness, in your solemn feast, in the beginning of your months, you shall blow with the trumpets over your burnt offerings, And over the sacrifice, your peace offerings they may be for you for memorial for your Lord. I am Lord your God. Okay, so notice again, as I mentioned, you're blowing the trumpets when you're going to war as well. And what trumpets are being blown? The not shofars, which is what they actually used in Jericho, but the katsasara. Well, they had 7 priests go in front of Jericho. They only have 2 of these trumpets, remember? And when you go to war, you're to blow these trumpets. And what's happening? You're going to be for the Lord your God and be saved from your enemies. Okay, so that sound of alarm, we read other places, will terrify the enemy, cause them go into confusion and stuff. Is the sound of impending doom to the wicked, but it's a sound of salvation to the righteous. Just again, like a little, we'll talk about this in more detail, but just like the day of alarming, Yom Teruah, for the righteous, saved from the snare is going to come on all the earth, saved from Messiah's own words in the tribulation. Everyone else, it's the alarm of impending doom. The tribulation's beginning. Or the events leading up to the tribulation, the end's not just not this the 7-day contract, covenant they make. The events leading up to it's really about 10-year period, but it's begun. The time of Jacob's trouble is upon them. So it's just like in one of them old Western movies. Maybe someone's got the wagon circled, and there's some, and there's some, there's some tribe, and perhaps there being some tribe out there for whatever reason, trying to wipe them out. And then they hear the bugle blow from the cavalry. And what happens? The people inside the wagon circle, all get this look of relief. And the people who are attacking them all get this look of panic and start trying to ride off as fast as they can. So the same symbol the sound that's the sound of assembly for the righteous is also the sound of alarm for the wicked. And again, God, we see this happen over and over again in Scripture, where occasionally they blow these, and confusion will be in the camp of the enemy, and so on and so forth. But now notice you're going to blow another way. Now this is Teruah. Tekiah. And that's the 3 medium-sized blast, okay? All right, the 3 medium-sized blast. And when do you do this? In the day of your gladness and your solemn days. Okay, now that can refer to the that could refer to some of these Moed appointments of God. We'll talk about that in a minute, here in a moment. The Moedim, plural, often translate feast. But it wouldn't have to be just those. It could also be a chag, which the king can declare like a national holiday. But notice some are gladness and some are solemn days. Like here in America, a day of gladness might be Independence Day. A solemn day certainly should be Memorial Day. That's, the point of it is that. So on those days, so it would include those perhaps declared by the king. Certainly means the ones for the appointed times with God, the Moeds, and also at the beginning of your months. Now, you're blowing the tekiah here. That third way to blow it, because remember, there's no keys or nothing. You can't change the tone or nothing like that. You could perhaps blow a little quieter, a little louder, but that's it. And so you're going to blow. So you're going to do it by how many blasts or how short the blasts are. That's what's going to be the deciding factor here, determining factor. And now notice it's at the beginning of your months. Well, now here's the thing. How do they know when the month began? Well, remember, they're knowing when to blow the alarm for other things by the revelation of God. The cloud goes up, the cloud goes down, all under control of God. Now, some people say, well, the Chodesh means renewed. literally, and it means month, the same words month, and then also means it's referring to the renewed moon when that first sliver of light, when you need 6 degrees, 6 degrees of illumination for the human eye to be able to see it without the aid of a microscope, I mean a telescope or something. Okay, that first appears. Now the trouble is you can't always see it. Maybe all cloudy or something. So you can't, observation's not reliable. Matter of fact, in Israel, about 7 years ago, I think it was about 7 years ago. No, I was thinking it was 2017. You know, fires broke up, and they couldn't see the. By the time they could see the moon, it was a half moon. Okay, it was way into the first quarter. So that's not reliable. Well, I mean, so they came up with a way to calculate it. Well, the problem with the calculation the rabbis use is there's a little bit of variance. They went off what's called the metatonic cycle. And I've been observed every 19 years, this cycle of the moon repeats that there's a little bit of variance of a couple minutes per 19 years. Well, the trouble is over 1900 years, you can get way off. Okay. You can get off, so you can start a month the wrong time. That can cause you to get the wrong, starts beginning of the year of the next year, the wrong month, and so on and so forth. So, calculation doesn't always work either. Now, they came with a system. Where you refresh the calculations through the time of the Messiah that they used because they had to do something, and that's what they used. And I actually, the Holy Spirit helped me, and I reversed engineered that. And actually, archaeology has confirmed what I reversed engineer actually works. They actually found tables with three years worth of these dates. With these dates, well, I'll explain why 3 years in a minute, because in 3 years' time, you're always going to have at least one leap month of these dates with the dates of the Roman dates on them as well. And the reason was people came long distance to come to the temple, and they had to know which month. They didn't know when to show up. Okay, so they came with a system, this system, but it requires calculating every year. And as they went along, they would confirm when they could see the new moon, make sure their calculations were correct, and so the system works, but it's not the way it was done here. Aaron's not doing all that. No, he's got the original way isn't by calculation or observation. It's by revelation. The priest has the Urim and Thummim. Well, if you remember in Nehemiah, if they come back, they don't have the Urim and Thummim anymore. And that's why they had to come up with this system that wasn't long-term calculation like the rabbis used today. And it wasn't observation like the Karaites used today, who the Sadducees came from. The two had to work together when the Romans came along, and they came up with this system that kind of took both into consideration. Okay. So, and again, that's what, and it apparently worked because Messiah had to be crucified on the exact day on God's calendar. So they apparently got that right. Pentecost had to occur or Shavuot had to occur on the exact day on God's calendar. They apparently got that right. So, but that's why they had to do it, because they have the Urim Thummim. But Aaron has the Urim Thummim, and so these priests, and remember, God spoke to them through them, just like the Holy Spirit speaks to us. They only spoke to the priest. So the priest is now blowing his trumpets, so there's no confusion over when the month began. And this is really all there is in the Torah commanded concerning the new moon. Now, later, remember I said the Chag, during the time of Saul, perhaps he established, perhaps it was earlier, whoever was the judge, perhaps before him, declared a Chag for the new moon, a national holiday. And they were taking it off. And in the future, when Messiah reigns, we're told it's going to be a holiday just like the Sabbath. And probably just for the purpose of keeping everyone, because his kingdom's worldwide, everyone gets that day off. Everyone knows when it is. Okay. So there's no confusion. So, and they're blow them over they're blow them, this blowing here, this tekiah, the three the three medium-sized blasts is the cur also when they on the burnt sacrifice and their peace offerings. No, it's not the sin offering, the burnt offering. Their punishment is being is taking their punishment. Peace offering, they have peace with God. So it's gonna be a memorial for God to remind a memorial that hey, we our punishment taken away and we have peace with you. Now, Numbers 10, if we continue on verse 11 through 13, now we're going to start. Now we find we're finally going to start moving. Everything's been set up, and this last little piece for them to know, for them to be able to know how to set up and move orderly. I mean, the move orderly has been put in place, and now it's time for them to actually all that to go to use. So here's what we read in Numbers 10, verses 11 through 13. It came to pass on the 20th day of the second month in the second year, cloud was taken up from off the tabernacle of the testimony. And the children of Israel took their journeys out of the wilderness of Sinai, and the cloud rested in the wilderness of Paran. And they took their journey according to the commandment of the Lord by the hand of Moses. So, notice when it is the first day, the 20th day of the second month, and that's in the second year. Remember the first year, it said when they got there. So they've been there almost a year. They've lots have happened as we discussed, but they've settled down there and gotten used to it. They got the water flowing from the rock. You don't have to worry about that. Got the manna coming down. They've gotten used to it. Everyone knows where their tent's going. It's all kind of convenient in that regard. Okay, perhaps they got some sort of trade going on. They know where their everyone knows where their flocks go, and as opposed to someone else's, or whatever. And it's all kind of they're kind of there. They've been there a year, but now they're taking this first journey according to the commandment of the Lord by the hand of Moses. Well, why they took their first journey? The first journey according to all these things I talked about the cloud going up, and then packing up and moving in a certain way, and knowing when each group moves by sound of these alarms and so on and so forth. All this orderliness I talked about. Before they were just camping wherever. I'm from this tribe, you're from that tribe, and you're my best friend. Let's camp next to each other. Hey, okay. But now they're organized again to form a giant cross. Again, we'll show some more evidence of that here in a moment. So the Lord's ultimately guiding us, not Moses, the Lord. And now let's continue on here. And we're get a little more drill, a little more detail about where the Levites fit in this. In Numbers 10, 16 through 22, we read the following. Over the host of the tribe of Zebulun was Eliab, the son of Helon. And the tabernacle was taken down, and the sons of Gershon, the sons of Merari, set forward, bearing the tabernacle. And the standard of camp of the Reuben set forward according to their armies. Over his host was Eliezer, the son of Sadir. And over the host of the tribe of the children of Simeon was Shalumiel, the son of Zurishaddai. And over the host of the tribe of the children of Gad was Eliasaphat, the son of Duel. And the Kohites set forward, bearing the sanctuary, and the other did set up the tabernacle against they came. And the standard of camp of the children of Ephraim set forward, according to their armies. Over his host was Elishama, the son of Amihud, the son of Amihud. Okay, so what we have here, notice the order first of all. Remember Zebulun? Remember the first one on the east who had to go first in front of everyone else was Judah, and followed behind him in his group. In his group was he was the fourth child of Leah, the fourth son of Leah through Leah, and his two brothers are there, Zebulun being the sixth one, being the youngest. Okay, so we see them marching in that movement. Their camps are in that same are like that. So Judah gets up, all these camps packed together. Judah goes, and so on and so forth. Now we read last week that the Levites were smack in the middle between Reuben and Ephraim, but now but now we get a little more detail. Well, what it meant was the Kohathites, because they're the ones bearing the furnishings. The other ones, Gershom, remember, they're responsible for the coverings of the tabernacle, the cloth coverings, and all that cloth that goes around the courtyard. The other parts, the posts and the posts and the actual building itself, Merari. And remember, Gershons have two wagons, covered wagons to carry stuff in. The sons of Merari have they have four wagons because their stuff's heavier, bigger, and heavier. Well, they're going to do, as I mentioned, they're going to take that down before the furniture's ever moved out. Okay. I mean, it's moved out of the building, but it's gonna be the last to go. So, or perhaps it's even moved out of all that. They tear it down, but it's the last to go, and we'll see why in a moment here. The standard. So then the standard. Now notice it's Reuben, Simeon, Gad. Gad being the oldest of Leah's concubine. Okay, being the oldest of Leah's concubine was down here. Zilpah. Okay, being all right is down here. So now, and again, so we got that order, and notice they're behind each other, just as I described last week. When they're all camped out, they're behind each other. When they're moving, they keep in that same order. They're behind each other. So each one's forming an arm of a cross, with the tabernacle and the Levites in that big hosting area, and the priest being in the center. And the other in the center of the camp of the children. Then finally we see the Kohathites. And why? The other set up against or over, set that before they came is what it means here. It's a little old English, but the idea is before they came. So this is why the other two are going in front of them a little bit. You know, they had to take the furnishings, the priests had to cover the furnishings first. They took them out of the way first. And so when they arrive, they'll already have that assembled. And if you remember, there's about 15,000 of the Gershon, of the sons of Gershon and the sons of Merari between ages 30 and 50. Okay. And they're going to that's going to set this up. Okay. So it's not going to take them long, but it's going to take them a little bit of time. So this way, the Kohathites aren't sitting around with the furniture parked. They're sitting there and they can bring it right in. They can bring it right into the tabernacle, and the priest can go ahead and uncover it, and so on and so forth. That's why it's done. That's why it's done. So why I said in the middle last time we looked at is because the most important part, the Ark of the Covenant, says bearing the sanctuary. Well, what they're talking about is the furnishings of the sanctuary. You know, they're not burning remember, they're not actually carrying the actual sanctuary, but they're talking about the furnishings. The furnishings. The most important one, of course, being the Ark of the Covenant. And that's why it's in the middle of them. And remember, that's where the presence of God was. And that's where that cloud stands over when the tabernacle is assembled. Right now, it's in front of them, leading them. So, and then followed by them is the next group, the ones in the west, Ephraim. So they're marching in that same order the camps are set up. The eastern one goes first, goes around to wherever they need to go. Depends which direction they're going. The southern one lines up behind them, and inside that group is these three tribes, and they're in that order. Behind them, the western one swings, goes over there. I mean, I'm sorry. First one goes, then part of the Levites go with the tabernacle and the cloth and the covering. Then the southern group goes. Then the Kohathites go. Then the westernmost, the Ephraim, go, and then finally the last group on the north goes. You know, the camp of Dan. You know, it's headed by the headed by the other son of the other son of the concubine of Leah, and the two concubines. I mean, I'm sorry, Rachel, and the two concubines of Leah. I might have that wrong. I think he's actually the oldest of. No, he's not the oldest of. I had it right. Okay, so. Oh yeah, the concubine Leah went. The concubine of Rachel went with Simeon and Reuben to replace Levi because that was his. So right. So anyways, the concubine of Dan there. Anyways, regardless. So Dan. So they make that order like I said, but they put then the very center is the Ark of the Covenant, which represents the presence of God being in the midst of them, even while they're marching. And of course we want God in our midst as well. Okay, so now I continue on. We wrap up here, Numbers 10, verse 33 through 36. And they departed from the Mount of the Lord 3 days' journey. And the Ark of the Covenant went before them in 3 days' journey to search out a resting place for them. And the cloud of the Lord was upon them by day when they went out of the camp. And it came to pass when the ark set forward that Moses said, "Rise up, Lord, let your enemies be scattered, let them that hate you flee before you. We arrested, return, O Lord, unto the many thousands of Israel." Okay, so what do we see here? Is notice they departed from the Mount of the Lord 3 days' journey. And remember, they left on the 20th day. And we're gonna look at that in a minute. That's gonna answer a question for us. Okay. We kind of brought it up last week. It's not real clear by itself, but we put all the information here, it'll become clear. We consider the context, the complete context of the scripture here, it'll become clear. So now they went 3 days to search out search out a resting place for them. So that cloud, remember, the angel of the Lord is going before them as God had said. He's in that cloud going before them. So they go out. So now they're heading out for a 3-day journey. Now notice what Moses does every time they head out. He says, "Arise, their enemies be scattered, and let them flee before you." He's asking the Lord to go before them, to prepare the way, to make things smooth for them. And see, before we begin the endeavor, we should be asking the Lord. We should ask him if he's in it, first of all. This is plainly he's in it. He's guiding them. We should first of all asking the Lord, "Hey, you want me to do this?" And if he does, ask him to prepare the way before us. Their enemies, God will do all the heavy lifting often on these things and make a transition a lot easier if we'll let him. And then when it rest it means that they're done traveling, returning to them, come back into our presence. So this is what the Moses is doing, and we need to be doing the same thing in our own lives. I mean, Josiah, God's favorite king, died because he didn't inquire of the Lord. What does mine? He's God's. I mean, God says he was better than David, but he dies at 38 years of age because Necho, king of Pharaoh, comes up, says, "Hey, your God told me to go through your land to take down Carchemish and bring about the fall of the Assyrians." And and Josiah withstood him, didn't inquire of the Lord. And the king had warned him, "Hey, don't be fighting against your own God. Don't be fighting me." But Josiah didn't believe him, just assumed he was up to no good, fought against him, and he died. Because he really was fighting against the will of the Lord there. But he went with the seeing of his own eyes and in his own hearing, and just saw their army and thought, "Wow, man, they're up to no good." But Necho, true to his word, went there, brought out the fall of Carchemish, came back down through Israel, and never attacked them, even though Josiah was already dead at that point. But Josiah did not inquire of the Lord first. Now, in this case, they don't have to. The Lord's make his will known, but we need to inquire of the Lord. And then we go somewhere before we start on whatever we know the Lord wants to do. Ask him to go before us, prepare the way. And when we get there, you know, and there may be physical location, or it could be like a new job, whatever. We need to ask him we need to ask for his presence to be with us. And this is why Yeshua, Jesus said, men ought to always pray. We need to pray all the time. We don't need to make assumptions. Hey, God, I've got this one. This one's a little one. I can handle it. I'll let you know when I can't. Nah, we have to pray always. Now we're looking. I mentioned that 23rd day is going to answer a question for us. Now we're going to go to one of these Moedim, Leviticus 23, 5 through 8. And we're talking about this. They're kind of in a set, and we'll see that. In the 14th day of the first month at even is the Lord's Passover. And the 15th day at the first month of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread unto the Lord. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. And the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. But you shall offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord 7 days. In the seventh day is a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. Okay, servile, we don't use that word very much today, but it means common, ordinary, not related to it's lawful to do good, Messiah said, but your everyday job, unless your everyday job is being the ministry or being a fireman or policeman, someone's house catch on fire and go, well, it's a Sabbath. I'm not I'll help you when sun goes down. Nah, it's something about it's something about everyday work that can be that can be put off another day, and you may not feel like it can be put off, but it can be. So it's talking about something that's not dealing with an emergency or in the ministry. If you're in the ministry, you got to take another day off because you still need a day off. Your body still needs it. But so these days are just like a holy convocation. We're to gather together. Okay, so here's where the confusion comes in. The 14th day here is the Lord's Passover. You looked right above there, so these are my feasts, my Moedim, my appointments. Well, there's three kinds of celebrate things like that. The Moedim, only the Lord can declare them. They mean appointed, literally. Most of it's actually used of a place, the tabernacle, temple, etc. An appointed place, the word Moedim. But if it is attached to a date, it means an appointed time, like here. So the appointed time. Appointments have a time and a place, by the way. People get all hung up on that. We're like, oh, give me this appointment. Well, not strictly speaking, because it has a place, and that place, the tabernacle, and it's not up. All we're doing is rehearsing right now. We're practicing. Okay, that's the best we can do. We can remember the day. We can have a remembrance, and do what we can, but we can't actually keep the whole appointment. We have to be in the land of Israel. The tabernacle has to be standing, and so on and so forth. Okay, but we can still rehearsal of day year after year, which is another word that's used sometimes. Well, so here we are. So now the 14th day is definitely the Lord's Passover. Call that. But also, if you go look in the New Testament, you'll see this, and oftentimes in Jewish, because these are all crunched together, 14th day through the 21st day, the whole group is called Passover, which is really three things actually. In that, it's Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the Feast of First Fruits, which always occurs on the Sunday during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Very plain. Day after the Sabbath, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Feel that very plain in Scripture. It's always a Sunday. And you got to count from it and get Pentecost. Pentecost is count another place that's count 7 Sabbaths, Shavuots, weeks, and the day after the seventh one, which would again always be a Sunday. So you can be certain it's always a Sunday during this week of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So the whole group's often called Passover because it begins with Passover. And that is actually found in the New Testament as well. So Passover can either mean the whole thing, 14th day to the 7th day, with these two extra this is actually the day of preparation as it brings on the Gospel of John. The day, at evening, remember evening, that period between sunset and nightfall is considered the beginning of one day and also the end of the previous day. So during that period between the 14th and 15th day, it's when you're actually supposed to eat Passover. Okay. So so you prepare during the daytime, but once the sun sets, now you're into the eating phase, the observation phase. So it can either mean just that day, or it can mean all the way through to including the end of all the way through the 21st day, where you have these other two holy, you have these two holy convocations at the beginning and the end, the first and seventh day. Okay, now here's what we see in Numbers 9, 10 through 12. Speaking of the children of Israel, saying, if any man of you or your prosperity shall by the unclean reason of a dead body or be in a journey far off, yea, shall keep the Passover of the Lord. The 14th day of the second month at even they shall keep it, even and eat it with the 20th, eat it with the unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Shall leave none of it till morning, nor break any bone of it, according to all the ordinance of the Passover, they shall keep it. Okay. So remember, we talked about this last week, a man unclean by a dead body. Okay. Or, a journey far off, because they're supposed to kill as if they're one man. They're supposed to be there. If you're in Jerusalem, if you're not in Israel, you can't kill it with the congregation as if the whole congregation was one man killing one lamb. Okay, so that's why it says a far off. Now they're to keep it. Now, does this mean this 14th day they're to keep it? But when it says to keep Passover, does it mean just the 14th day, which would the 14th day is truly into that nightfall? The period of evening, as we've shown before, is considered the beginning of one day and the end of the previous day, and nightfall is the end of the previous day, and the period in between them is an overlap. Okay, or does it mean the whole thing, 14th to the 21st day? And so when you read these two things together, it's really hard to tell, because it does say the word Passover, and the word Passover is used both ways in Scripture. Okay, so they're to keep it. Notice not breaking any bone of it. It's talking about the lamb, as I mentioned before. And the lamb is what only those who are circumcised are to eat, because everyone's to keep the feast of unleavened bread, which is part of it. Okay. And those bitter herbs don't just speak of the bitterness of slavery in Egypt, but they speak of the bitterness the Messiah bore on the cross as well. And not one bone of his was broken, in accordance with this. So, it's a total sacrifice, none left till morning, completely covering. So, which is it referring to? Well, now let's go back to our text here. It went up on the 20th day. Okay. Well, if they only traveled that one day, then on the 21st day, the guy could take off it'd be the seventh day of the feast of unleavened, of the makeup feast of unleavened bread, and he could take that off, and he could then just rest that day. Servile work would include moving the camp, by the way. Okay, that's something they ordinarily did. So, but the thing is, they went 3 days. Okay, they're gonna go 3 days journey. So it plainly doesn't mean Passover means just the 14th day. Now, me and my family back here, this dead body. Anytime my daughter had to be in the hospital during Passover, we always observed the whole thing. Weren't sure, so we wanted to be on the safe side and made up not just Passover, but also the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But now it's been plain we didn't really have to do that. Okay, and why would I say if we're in the hospital, she's in the hospital? Because the unclean by reason of a dead body. Hospitals, people die there. Any room where they're at is unclean or unclean. But also, I learned when we saw my wife already knew this, but I saw it when my mother-in-law died. They bring a thing that looks like a food cart, like a cart. They gather the trays over, the tray, the empty food trays over and stuff. And they put the body in there and put the covering over it, so you can't tell there's a body in there. Just like but they also cover up the food cart, the dirty dishes cart. I guess what I should say, the dirty dishes cart. Okay, it looks similar, and they go down the hall with it, and then the elevator, and then down to the elevator to the morgue. Well, you don't know if a dead body's gone to the hall. You don't know. You don't know if it's been in the elevator. Well, anywhere where that dead body's been, we're told is unclean. Okay, so therefore, we might be unclean. We go to the hospital. We don't know necessarily one way or another. Sometimes we do. There's a code. My wife be, oh yeah, somebody died or whatever. She'll just tell me. But so if she went to the hospital, we had to keep the makeup Passover. Now, what's the deal with this makeup Passover? But it turns out it's only the 14th day. We didn't have to keep the repeat the keep the feast of unleavened bread as well. But it didn't hurt anything. Better to err on the side of caution if you're not sure, which is what we were doing. But why is this so important? That it's the only holiday, as I mentioned before, as a makeup holiday. Well, that's brought out for us here in 1 Corinthians 5:7-8. Purge out therefore the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, as you're unleavened. For even Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us. Therefore, let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, neither with the leaven of malice and wickedness, with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Okay, so notice we're to purge out the unleavened, the old leaven, and our Passover. Notice keep the feast. Well, the feast is actually the feast of unleavened bread, particularly if you're circumcised. It's the feast of unleavened bread, but it actually includes Passover. Well, how can they keep Passover? Remember that period between the evening of the 14th day and nightfall is the end of the 14th day. But it's also the beginning of the 15th day. Okay, and what can you do? Well, the feast of unleavened bread's for everyone, not just those who are circumcised. So you can eat the unleavened bread. In the Messiah's time, Messiah himself put a stamp on this. They also passed the cup, drank the wine. Communion. This is when communion is supposed to be observed. Is actually on Passover, and actually, if you read the text about Passover we discussed before, it's not, you don't have a big banquet like sometimes people do. You're supposed to do it in your home. And if a family's too small, you gather your nearest neighbors. Doesn't matter if you like them or not, just your nearest neighbors. Assuming the whole, your whole neighborhood's keeping it. Doesn't matter if you like them or not. You gather your nearest neighbors in, and so that, there's enough, and you kind of do it like that. So this is when communion's actually supposed to be happening. It's supposed to be in the home. And it's supposed to be, the unleavened bread and the wine, just like Messiah had. But the reason, and then, and he took away our sin. I mean, that's why there's that parallel at that period. When the death of the Lamb immediately brought about, paid the price for our sin. And this is why there's a makeup one, because it's not about the deliverance for Egypt. That's important to remember, particularly if you have ancestors who came from that. We've all been delivered from Egypt, the world, we're supposed to be. The trouble is, as I mentioned at the beginning of this series, it's not God getting them out of Egypt. It's getting Egypt out of them. Okay. We're believers. We've been taken out of the world. We've been called out of the world system into God's system. Okay. Now that's important, but how did we get there? By the blood of the Lamb, by this Lamb. And I'll remind you, we showed this. We'll talk about this in a moment too. That was whoever put the blood on their door, whether it says Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob or not, was passed over for destruction. Whoever denied the blood on the door, whoever denied the blood, it didn't matter the sins of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The instructions say nothing about that. It just says put the blood on your door. And whoever did not have it on their door, the firstborn died. So so Messiah has died, and it's up to us to apply the blood on our door, the doorpost of our hearts. And how do we do that? We get rid of that leaven of malice and wickedness, and have instead live a life of sincerity and truth. Malice and wickedness is the way of the world. Ill will towards each other and treating people badly and dealing them wrong is the way of the world. We live in sincerity and truth. We aren't lying to people. There's nothing fake about us. We have genuine care for one another. fact, that's how all men will know us, is that we're his disciples by our love for one another. And that means we have to make sacrifice sometimes. Give something we want because someone else needs something. We're not giving them something we want so they can get something they want always. It's more like they need it, and but we have to be a living sacrifice. I mentioned last week. So now we talked about the moving, and they're finally moving. But now we're going to look at the reaction to the people about this. Now, Numbers 11, 1 through 3 read the following. When the people complained, it displeased the Lord, and the Lord heard it. His anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burnt among them and consumed them that were in the othermost parts of the camp. The people cried to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire was quenched. Okay. And then the name of the place was Taberah, because the fire of the Lord burnt among them. All right, burnt by the Lord, is what Taberah means roughly. All right, the fire. Okay, so these people are burnt by the Lord. Well, who? The people. When it says the people, it usually means the only sins of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will say the children of Israel. The people means the people of the congregation, which would include the children of Israel and that mixed multitude we talked about, who were grafted in, as we shown. Everyone, as we shown, it says in Joshua, all those came out of Egypt got circumcised. Okay, were circumcised. So the fire of the Lord is. So notice how God is. They're complaining. What's they're complaining about? They were all comfortable. They got comfortable at Sinai, as I mentioned. And now he's disrupted their comfort. And, we don't know when it may have been the middle of the night from what we read. They're complaining they're having to move. Some of them didn't like change. And where were they? In the othermost parts of the camp. Okay. Parts farthest out. And that kind of gives us a clue of what tribes that was. Remember, the farthest out ones were those leader tribes we talked about. Okay. And Moses prayed, so the Lord burnt them there. And notice it's the people who are native born and those who've been grafted in through circumcision. They're doing the complaining in this particular case. And this is not one of the camps they stop at. We'll see it in a minute. This is a place they stopped overnight on their 3-day journey. So on the first day, they didn't like being moved. They didn't like having to move and pack up all their stuff. And some of them whined about it. And God was not, he wasn't as amused, and he just really wasn't that sympathetic to their complaints, to say the least. Now we continue on in Numbers 11 in verse 4 through 9, and we see some more complaining. Here's what we read. And the mixed multitude was among them that fell lusting. And that means desiring. The children of Israel also wept again, who said, Who shall give us flesh to eat? We remember the fish, which we did eat in Egypt freely. The cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. The garlic. And now our soul is dried away. There's nothing at all besides this manna before our eyes. Now the manna was this coriander seed. The color was the color of bdellium. And the people went about and gathered it and ground it in mills and beat it in the mortar and baked it in pans and made cakes of it. And the taste was the taste of fresh oil. And when the dew fell upon the camp at night, the manna fell upon it. Okay, so I want you to notice who's complaining here. Okay, that's the first thing here. Who's complaining? The mixed multitude is desiring, but the children of Israel are actually the ones that's complaining. All right, but perhaps the mixed multitude mentioned it. And remember, the mixed multitude, as I said, have already been circumcised, and we're part of each of these armies, except in these camps, because there's no mention of them except first time they mentioned they left Egypt. Okay, why they mentioned here separately? Why not just part of the congregation? Why the distinction? Because it started with them, and even though they've been circumcised, kind of native born, there's still a little distinction. And if you remember over in your Brit Hadashah, your New Testaments, it'll say Nicholas, a proselyte. Well, he was what's that? That's a Gentile who got circumcised and grafted in. You know, he in Hebrew they're called the Ger the ones and those who worship God, and which means the righteous stranger, and those who worship God are the ger Tashav, which is the stranger of the gate, because they can't go past when the temple was open, they couldn't go past the gate of the sorag. They could just go up to the gate. That's as far as they could go. They weren't circumcised. Okay, so they were both. They recognized and often when they talk about strangers, it's usually referring to dwelling among them. It's referring to the ger Tashav, not the ger Tzedekah. Well, in this case, we know they've been circumcised except for their children, their young children, which we saw haven't been circumcised, but everyone else has been, and they're the ger. So they're the ger Tzedekah here. That's this mixed multitude at this point. That's their status. Okay, there's that distinction brought out for them, and there's a good reason for that. And we'll see this. So they began desiring, and they caused children of Israel to weep also. And why are they complaining about the food? What about this food in Egypt? They ate fish, cucumbers, melons, onions, leeks, garlic. Okay, they were familiar with this fish, and the fish of Egypt is tilapia, by the way. And they grew it in such abundance in the Nile River at the time. It was easy to catch, and it didn't cost nothing basically. They could eat as much as they wanted. Well, they're missing what's familiar to them. They've been away from Egypt for a year. And now they're complaining about what God's provided. And notice we read before, we talked about this. It's white, it's angels' food. It's not familiar to them, but it takes a little bit of effort on their behalf. Remember, we read about it can be made like cakes dimensions here, or it can be made like oatmeal. It could also be made like that, or cream of wheat, whatever you want to say. And or couscous, something can be made that way as well. And remember, we read it tasted like honey before, and also oil. I mean, basically, think of the taste as similar to, say, a glazed donut. That's what we're talking about here. I mean, well, particularly children would find this delicious. So they got this delicious food coming by, but what they don't have is this food that they're familiar with from where they left from. And remember, Egypt's a picture of the world. And they've left behind the worldly things to move into the things of God, and they're complaining. Now, the mixed multitude get a bad rap here about this complaint, but this is the only place that ever says they led the children of Israel in weeping. Remember, a moment ago, it was the people, it was the mixed multitude and the children of Israel together. But when you go to Massa, where the water was, it was only the children of Israel. Now the mixed multitude, how'd they get there with them? Well, if you remember about in the seventh plague, the children of Israel told to put your animals in the barn, and everyone get in the house. And when the plague comes, none of your animals are going to die, none of your people are going to die. And some of the Egyptians started doing the same thing. So they saw that the children of Israel, who the chosen people, are chosen to show us to show people how to walk in the ways of God. Okay, so they start following the example of the children of Israel, because they're supposed to be showing how to do the things in the way of God. The first people to complain over at Massa were the children of Israel, not the people, not the whole group, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So they learned to complain from them instead of learning to appreciate what God offered. Then we saw the people, the whole group. Okay, they're both complaining, but they're doing it together. Now, because they've learned to complain from the children of Israel about what God's provided, now they're influencing the children of Israel. Remember, the children of Israel were supposed to be influencing them to appreciate what God had and to walk in his ways. So this is learned behavior by the mixed multitude. The they're going to become more blended in, married in, and stuff later. But they've learned this behavior, this bad behavior, from who was supposed to be demonstrating to them to teach them good behavior, and that will come out a little bit more plain as we go along here. So, because sometimes Jewish people are like, oh, well, the problem is they brought the mixed multitude with them. No, Jews are getting in trouble all by themselves. They don't need Gentiles to do it. We saw how with Jacob, how he had to get the idols out of his camp, and there was no one in there but Jews. Okay. And the source was Rachel, we saw his own wife. After God wrestled with him, he had to get the idols out of his camp. We saw how all the children of Israel, went into worshiping idols in Egypt. They don't need Gentiles influencing them. They can be separated from them completely, and they're still going to rebel against God. And we'll talk about more about this in less than next week. But that is just someone looking for someone else to blame for their own shortcomings. And that's exactly what they're saying about the mixed multitude. Well, the mixed multitude hadn't been when they hadn't done this. No, it's the only time the mixed multitude done, especially with any of their sins. The rest of everything else we read throughout the entire Acts of Moses was all them. Okay, so don't be, being racist here, basically trying to blame all these people, these other races, for the bad behavior of the people of Israel, the children of Israel. They influenced. They were supposed to influence those people of other races to do what's right, and they influenced to do what's wrong. And now the group that's learned from them, the student has become the teacher. Let's continue on here in Numbers 11, verse 10 through 15. Then Moses and the people weep throughout their families, every man in the door of his tent, and the anger of the Lord was greatly kindled, and Moses also displeased. And Moses said to the Lord, wherefore have you afflicted your servant? Wherefore I have not found favor in your sight, that you lay the burden of all this people upon me? Have I conceived all this people? Have I begotten that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom, as a nursing father bears the sucking child, in the land which you swear unto their fathers? Should I have flesh to give all this? From where should I have flesh to give all this people? For they weep to me, crying, saying, give us flesh to eat. I am not able to bear this alone. Those people alone, because it's too heavy for me. If you have thus dealt with me, kill me, I pray you, out of hand. If I found favor in your sight, and let me not see my wretchedness. Okay, so first thing I want you to notice is, starting at the top, all the families are weeping. Now, can you imagine 3 million people weeping, what that sounded like? That would be grating on the nerves. I mean, this, anger of the Lord's kindled greatly, and we're going to see what he does about that in a moment. But Moses says displeased is, again, kind of, the Bible sometimes has a way of understating things. I mean, that's putting it lightly here. I mean, look what he says. Look what he says. I mean, remember the words of Solomon. One man rules over another to his own hurt. It's not always good to be the boss. He's ruling over all these people, these 3 million people. He likes the job so well. He says to God, if you really love me, if I've really found favor in you, you really like me, just kill me and get me out of my misery. Okay. It's just too much to bear. Of course, that's how something else too. We saw Moses thing before, where he's wearing him out with the judging and needs some help. And when he's trying to do it all himself, harkens back to that. Now I want to clarify this thing about where's he, where am I getting all that meat from? Well, as a nursing father bears a sucking child. Now, what's it talking about there? Men don't produce milk except, well, just like today, we have baby bottles, and and maybe the mother, or expresses the milk, or maybe a wet nurse or something like that, or perhaps to get a little older, you can give them animal milk or whatever. And the father can hold a baby bottle, and and feed the child. Well, in their case, what they had was carrying your bosom. They had what they call a breast bottle. Say the mom died, and they had to get milk from the other woman to she'd fill that breast bottle, express that, and fill the breast bottle. Maybe some another woman is nursing or something, or what's called a wet nurse. They just keep in that state all the time because they go around nursing other children, other women's children when they're sick or whatever. Um, so or they put animal milk and they put that on their chest, and it'd be where the mom's breast was, and then they had a sling thing, put the baby in to carry him in their bosom, and that child could nurse on the father, just like, just like, just like it would with his mother out of this breast bottle. That's what it's referring to. And the people, Moses, when Moses talking there, everybody understands this. But the day they're like, oh, that's very unscientific. That's not true. Men can't do. Well, men weren't. That's how that worked. But people at the time understood how that worked. So, Moses is displeased. You know, all this weeping and whining and complaining about what God says. Moses is not amused, to say the least. He's not sympathetic to their complaint at all. But now we're gonna look at what the Lord's reaction to the thing is. The Lord's greatly angered. We saw that, but let's see how that plays out. What's he do about that anger? Well, let's just see. In Numbers 11, 15, 11, Numbers 11, we continue on Numbers 11, verse 16 to 20, read the following. Lord said to Moses, gather me 70 elders of the men, 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be elders of the people. Officers of them and bring them into the tabernacle, and they may stand there with you. And I will come down and talk with you there, and I'll take the spirit which is upon you, and I'll put it upon them, and they may bear the burden with you, that you bear not all by yourself alone. And you shall say to the people, sanctify yourself again tomorrow, and you shall eat the flesh that you have wept in the ears of the Lord, saying, who shall give us flesh? For it is well with us in for it was well with us in Egypt, therefore the Lord will give you flesh that you may eat. You shall not eat 1 day or 2 days or 5 days, neither 10 days nor 20 days. But even the whole month it shall come out of your nostrils, and be loathsome unto you, because you despise the Lord which is upon you, and have wept before him, saying, why came he forth out of Egypt? Okay, no, first 70 elders again. We saw that before. Okay, 70 elders went up with him and went so far and ate with and ate with God, which explains Messiah, right? Well, this is another group here, another 70. And again, why 70? Because 70 root nations, representing the Gentiles. Now, he's going to put the Spirit upon them to help and Moses ain't going to bear this alone anymore. Okay. Now, this is just like the judicial branch we saw with judges. So, well, we got this other administration here going on, as it were, but he needs help with it. And again, we have that picture of the king, Moses being over all of them, the commoners, and that middle layer. Okay. That middle layer. And the middle layer here is a little bit is a lot smaller, but still another middle layer. And see, and it's a picture of Messiah's kingdom. You got Messiah as the king, but we see in Matthew 5:19, those who keep the least commandments and those who keep the least commandments and teach others to do so are going to be great in the kingdom. They're going to be that middle layer. They're in the kingdom, but they're great in it. Those who break these least commandments and teach others to do so are going to be least in the kingdom. They're in the kingdom, but they're in that bottom layer. Okay. So, it's not, that's not about, we're not keep in the least commandments of these commandments we've talked about before, and we've shown, well, look, what's the weightier commandments? Not murdering, stealing, things like that. Those things that, like in 1 Corinthians 6:9-11, if you do those things, you're not going to inherit the kingdom of God. And that includes getting drunk and fornicating, having sex outside of marriage, and taking drugs and those kind of things. Okay, you're not going to inherit the kingdom of God. Anyone tells you so, according to 1 Corinthians 6:9, 9-11, is a deceiver. You ain't getting in if you do that. Those are the weightier matters. What's the least matter? Well, these mammons, it's like these animals are unclean to you. It literally says it in English, and it says in English, but also literally says it in Hebrew. Why unclean to them? Because they're set apart to be a separate people. They got more restrictions to set them apart as separated, as more holy to God than the rest of the human race. And we have shown how the Levites were more holy than the rest of the camp of Israel, and how the priests were more holy than the Levites, and the high priests more lowly. And every time you go up, you have more restrictions on you. Well, the nation of Israel is meant to be more holy than all the other nations. They got something separating them. So that's these commandments. So you got these three layers here. But those 70 elders, I mean, represents the Gentiles, and tells us the Gentiles, if they want to keep those things, can become part of that middle layer. Because Jesus didn't say whoever's the son of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and does this that can be great in the kingdom. Just whosoever. Just like with Passover, and remember that's how the 70 multitude got there. How why was there a mixed multitude? Weren't there, it says everyone didn't have the blood, was weeping, and there was a house in Egypt where there wasn't someone that died, the firstborn. Well, why weren't they weeping? They put the blood on their door. The commandment said nothing about whether you're descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob or not. Just whoever puts the blood, your firstborn is going to be spared. Whoever passed over, going to be redeemed. Whoever doesn't, going to be, not going to be spared. Same thing here. So this is why, this is my 70, and put the spirit upon them, just like we have to have the spirit in us, so we're none of his. The spirit had to be upon them. Why? So they could walk in God's statutes and commandments, because you cannot do it on your own strength. You never could. You cannot keep the holy laws of God, commandments of God, without the Holy Spirit to give you strength to do so. So now he's showing that, and now he says he's going to give them. He's going to give them. He's going to give them flesh. And then they want flesh. They're saying what God provided was loathsome to them. Their soul was dried up. They just couldn't stand to eat this manna no more. Well, he's going to give them what they want for a whole month. Until, look, notice it comes out of your nostrils. We're going to look at that in a moment and explain it a little bit more in detail. And loathsome, so they're just plain sick of it. He's going to give them what they want. So they're sick of it. Just like they were complained about being sick of what he had provided for them. And notice the connection to Egypt again. Mentioned here twice. Okay, that flesh is a connection to Egypt. We'll look at that in a minute. Remember, it's the fish of Egypt they wanted. Okay, fish come out of the water, right? Okay, now Moses wants a little information how this is going to work. As we see here, it's not doubting God, but like Mary saying, "Hey, okay, I'm a virgin. How's that going to work?" Well, this is the same thing, same sort of thing here. Moses isn't not doubting God, but he does. But he wants to know if he has to do something. Is what it really amounts to. Him and these 70 elders, he just got some help from. And here's what he reads: Moses said, "The people among whom that God promised, he hadn't got them yet, but among whom I am, are 600,000 footmen." And you have said, I'll give them flesh them to eat a whole month. Shall the flocks and herds be slain for them to suffice them? Or shall the fish of all the fish of the sea be gathered together for them to suffice them? And the Lord said to Moses, if the Lord's hands wax short, you shall see where my word shall come to pass unto you or not. And Moses went out and told the people the words of the Lord, and gathered the 70 men of the elders of the people, and set them round about the tabernacle. Okay, he's gathered one around the tabernacle. Those two trumpets we read about earlier were blown. Okay, one for the leaders of the army, one for the leaders of the people, and then one for the rest of the people. So he's gathered them to tell him have Moses tell him what's going to happen. Now, a whole month. He thinks he's got to feed all the flocks and herds. So what's that tells us? They could have had meat, at least not every day, maybe, but anytime they wanted. They had flocks and herds with them. They came out of Egypt with them. This thing about the fish of the sea. Well, maybe it's not that far from the sea where they're at. Go over there and catch some fish. Maybe Moses thinking, get them all fishing. Get them, start killing their, this. Moses is looking. Okay, how am I going to manage this? My own strength, not considering that God could provide it. That God might have a supernatural solution. Now, sometimes He will tell you to do something like this and say, "Okay, go do that," whatever. But sometimes He's going to intervene. He's going to intervene personally and directly. And that's what the Lord's telling him here. No, you don't have to do any of that. I'm going to directly do that. So now they're all the 70 men of the elders of Israel, the people that's going to have the Spirit, promise put the Spirit upon. And he sets them all around, and he set them all around the tabernacle. Okay, and that 70 should also remind us of the 70 Messiah sent out two by two, and that, and I don't I have to look at it carefully, but I don't think it included and specifically mentions the apostles. They may have all been elders. That would have had meaning to the people of Israel at that time about these 70 elders, okay, who were doing that because he was a prophet like unto Moses. So in the same way, he's sending 70 out just as Moses has these 70 people with the Spirit on them to help them. Because remember, the ones Messiah sent out, all did supernatural acts. They cast out demons and raised the dead and so on. So the Spirit of God was upon them as well. So now he's got his 70, he's got his helpers there. Now he's got them gathered. The Spirit's not upon them yet, but it's about to be. Now here's, as we continue on Numbers 11:25 through 29, read the following. The Lord came down in the cloud and spoke unto him, took the Spirit upon him and gave it unto the 70 elders. And it came to pass, when the Spirit rests upon them, they prophesied and did not cease. But there remained two of them, of the men of the camp. The name was Eldad, and the other was Medad. And the Spirit rested upon them. And they were of them that were written, but went not out into the tabernacle. And they prophesied in the camp. And there ran a young man, told Moses, said, Eldad and Medad do prophesy in the camp. And Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of Moses, one of his young men, answered and said, My Lord Moses, forbid them. And Moses said, Envy you for my sake? Would God that all the Lord's people were prophets, and the Lord put his Spirit upon them. Okay. And the Lord put his Spirit upon them. Anyways, so notice the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke to Moses. And now he's got the 70 elders and put upon them. And notice how there's this, remember, just like the day of Pentecost, verbal confirmation of spirits there. They're prophesying. They're saying things of by the Spirit. A prophet is a message, God as a spokesman, but prophesying is just giving a message God gave to the Spirit, and they're not ceasing. They're out there prophesying. Okay, so now remember the elders are over all the people, and the people are respecting them. So now they got this. But notice there's two more in the camp, Eldad and Medad, and now we got 72. They're not one of those 70. They're part of this, and they're not out, and they're not going out of the tabernacle. They're staying there. They met the tabernacle. Moses has these other guys going out with these instructions. So he's not trying to do all this by himself. And they're prophesying in the camp. Okay. So now, of course, this reminds us here, perhaps, of the two witnesses, but also there's another picture. And this makes six. Now we got 72. We can have 6 from each tribe. Now, counting Levi, because Levi's, those elders are ruling over ruling over the rest. The elders of the Levites, as it were, would be the priest. Okay. So these rulers. So, think of the two witnesses. You also perhaps it doesn't specify much about them. The Spirit could have came upon them. They could be, one of them could be part of that mixed multitude we read about. We just don't know. It doesn't say tell us anything about them. The other ones, Well, they're just elders of Israel, elders of the people. So they could also be the mixed multitude, members of the mixed multitude as well, who are counted as if they were native born. But there's still, again, notice a little distinction. It has to be because some things only people with a certain lineage can do. So you got to keep track of that. As we saw, the pedigree started with Moses, not with Nehemiah, centuries, 2,000 years later, or 1,000+ years later. So the spirits rest upon them, and they're coming. And notice now, why is Joshua saying this? Forbid them. When Moses knows, he's envying for their sake. Well, remember, Moses is the only one that had the Spirit on him. Moses, everyone had to come to him. Okay, now everyone doesn't have to come to him. And this is the attitude sometimes of religious leaders. Yeah, the Spirit of God, yeah, the God's on them and whatever. But Joshua thinks Moses is concerned, about this prestige and power, and everyone has to come to him. And Moses couldn't care less about that. Moses is not looking to be exclusive. He doesn't want the people to have their eyes on him. He wants them to have them on God. Those that God's people were prophets, spokesmen for God. And we all should be spokesmen for God in the sense, remember, in Revelation, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus. We should all be, that spirit should be moving upon us to testify of Jesus. Certainly. Yeshua, however you like. And that should be all of God's people. And the spirit should be upon all the people. And if we're born again, his spirit must be in us. We're none of his, we're told in Romans 8. And what's the purpose of the Spirit of God? So we can keep the commandments of God. The Holy Spirit's main purpose is to help us be holy by keeping the holy commandments. And people say, I've heard believers say, "Oh no, the Bible says says we can't keep God's law." No, the Bible says the carnal mind in Romans 8:7, it says the carnal mind cannot keep God's law. But Paul says we have the mind of Christ. If you have the mind of Christ, Messiah could keep the law of God through the he came as a man, showed us how through the Spirit of God. We through the Spirit of God can also keep the law of God. The parts that apply to us. Again, you don't have to keep the least commandments unless you want to be great in the kingdom. Then you have to. That's all it's for. You can be in the kingdom by keeping, but you have to keep as I mentioned, the weightier matters, or you're not getting in. But you can't do either without the Spirit of God. So Moses isn't trying to build up isn't looking out for himself in his ministry and how can I make me bigger, except and oh my gosh, I'm losing some power and whatever. He's concerned about the people of God. He's got the heart of a good shepherd, but the heart of a bad shepherd is trying to hold hold it all in. Everyone have to come to him. If you got a minister like that, you need to get away from him. Now, in Numbers 11:30-35, read the following. Moses got into the camp, and he and the elders of Israel. And he put forth the wind, and there went forth a wind from the Lord. He brought quails from the sea, and let them fall by the camp, as it were a day's journey on this side, and as it were a day's journey on the other side, round about the camp. And it was 2 cubits high upon the face of the earth. People stood up all that day and all that night, all the next day. They gathered the quails. He gathered the least, gathered 10 omers. They spread them abroad for themselves round about the camp. And while the flesh was still between their teeth, was chewed, the wrath of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord smote the people with a very great plague. And he called that place Kibroth Hata'ava, and because they buried the people that lusted. And it means burial the lusted. Luster means desired. And they journeyed from Kibroth Hatava to Hazarot and abode at Hazarot. Okay, so now they went through 3 days. They stayed there, and they're there a whole month. Okay, because remember, he said they'd given this a whole month. They're there at least a month. and plus them because they got to bury these people. Now, notice he said they'd come out of their nostrils. So what happened? They choked on it. Okay. Now let's talk about what they choked on. He brought quails. Now from the sea. Now perhaps God was creating them on the fly, or they were over near the sea and he blew them over the sea. Now either way, from the east. Okay, Egypt's to the west where they are now. Where an east wind blew all night to part the waters. Okay, so people said, well, they're on. This shows they're on Sinai, not even on the Arabian Peninsula. Didn't say how far it was. Okay, and in fact, we're going to show next week that they can't that Mount Sinai from Scripture cannot possibly be on the misnamed Sinai Peninsula. Okay, we're gonna show that next week. Nah, in fact, the land of Midia, where Horeb, where Sinai was, or also called Horeb. The Scripture makes plains in the land of Midia, and that's northwest today, modern northwest Saudi Arabia. Okay, so this east wind blew them from across the Arabian Sea, or perhaps they were just multiple. They were created there, just on the spot. God's creating them. It's like when Jesus multiplies the fish and the loaves, or Elijah. In another case, even the first time something like that happened wasn't with the Messiah. So they're coming across there. They're being blown east, and then from the south. So the south winds come from the south. So they're being so now being blown north. Well, why? Why? Well, east. Okay, God's moving east because that's the direction. That's the direction of redemption and everything. Like Messiah was crucified to the east of the camp, and so on. So, or the Mount of Olives was to the east, so on and so forth. Okay, now the south, because they're moving towards the promised land at this point, now become clearer next lesson. So now they're being pushed north. So they quells created on the fly the east and then pushed north. Now, what quails are these? They're called Pharaoh's quail. They're from from Egypt, and sometimes you can find them other places like Saudi Arabia, as I mentioned, except then the Gev Desert, except down there. But I used to raise quail. They're the largest quail, large variety, the best tasting. Okay, so they're associated with Egypt. Why the sea? Because remember they want the fish. The fish live in the water. Okay, Moses even brought we can get fish out of the ocean instead. Maybe instead of the fish of Egypt they're used to tilapia. Yeah, those are tilapia. I took my cues for making food for Passover from the Bible itself. The garlic, onions, leeks. I mean, I make the tilapia with onions and leeks and olive oil. It's delicious. And the onion and cucumbers and onions, the cucumbers, onions, and garlic. I put it with some Middle East spice and and either cubed stew meat from beef or lamb sometimes. Again, delicious. Now, so that's how I got my cold. That's how I started. You're supposed to, according to the word of God, we saw as if you were there personally. So I just I started figuring out how to make Egyptian food because that's what they were eating. Well, in this case, these quails are that type of Egyptian. So he got that associated with the sea, the water, didn't bring him fish, tilapia, but he did bring him these quails they were used to. And so he gave them what they wanted. And now they've choked on it. And a very great plague. It means a lot of them died. Okay, we don't know how many, but a lot of them died here. And they buried them. And they're loathsome. They don't want to sit there quell the rest of the days of their lives. So as they complained about the manna, the things they complained about the manna now came upon them. God gave them what they wanted. And it's like the American proverb. Be careful what you wish for, you just might get it. So that's how he took his wrath on them, was by actually giving them what they wanted. And notice this: a day's journey. Well, a day's journey can, let's say, between 15 to 40 miles. You can be as much as 43 miles. Like Paul walked 43 miles at one time, and that was standard among the Romans when they were going this one route. You trudge along about 3 miles an hour for 14 hours a day because they're just They get up when the sunlight, when it gets close, about an hour for sundown. In the summer, you got long enough days. So there they are. So maybe somewhere out there, let's say 20 miles all around, there's this quail. They're 2 cubits high. 2 cubits. As I mentioned, the royal cubit is the royal cubit of Egypt, where they came from. We know this from we know this from archaeology, was 20 and 2/3 inches. So this is roughly a little over a meter for metric. 41 inches, a yard and 5 inches if you're using American standard. And that is a lot of quail. So that, and when this omers, remember an omer's right around the size of a quart. And this is after the prepared, they gave 10 omers, not 10 omers of live birds, 10 omers of prepared ones. And they spread them abroad. So they're going to have they said they're going to have this big feast. But, God gave them what they wanted. They demanded it, and it brought them death because they didn't want what he provided. So now we're going to Numbers 33, our itinerary, and we read this about them. Numbers 33, 16 through 17. They moved from the desert of Sinai and pitched at Kibroth Hattaavah. And they departed from Kibroth Hattaavah and encamped at Hazerot. Okay, so remember the itinerary we showed before. This is the place that actually, you notice how Taberah is not mentioned here. Well, Taberah was just a place they stopped overnight as they went 3 days journey. Okay, the first day. The complaining started right away. So, they didn't like change. They were familiar with, they were complaining about not having the food they're familiar with. They were complaining about having to move from somewhere they're familiar with. Sign they become familiar with it by a year's time. And, if you complain about change, God is not sympathetic to you if he's the one directing you to make the change. Yes, as we see, he's not that sympathetic. In fact, it ticks him off and makes him angry. Don't be complaining about change when God is instructing you to change. Surely trouble will come upon you, as I've seen it happen to other people. Now, and these things we talked about here are summarized here in Deuteronomy 9:22. At Taberah, at Massah, in a Kibroth, in a Kibroth Hattaavah, you provoked the Lord to wrath. Or remember, Taberah is the whole people led it jointly together. At Massah, where the water was only the children of Israel. But now the mixed multitude is those Gertazedekah have been influenced by the children of Israel who did the complaining, began the complaining first. And lastly, the teachers have become the students have become the teachers, and they led the complaint. They stirred up the discontent that they stirred up the discontent, and then the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, children of Israel, joined them in it. So these are all three places where they complained because they didn't like what God provided, didn't see how, doubted him and complained about him inconveniencing them, like a Taberah, about the food, about about his provision. And the Lord was not sympathetic to them at all. It provoked him to wrath. He's not going to be sympathetic to you either. Don't be whining when he tells you to do something. Trust him instead and just do it. Now we read here in Psalms 78, verse 76 to 31, a little more details about this and about who particular, about this destruction came on them from the quails. Let's read what it says here. He caused an east wind to blow from heaven, and by his power he brought in the south wind. He rained flesh upon them as the dust, and feathered fowls like the sea sands of the sea. He let it fall in the midst of their camp, round about their habitations. So when they were well filled, for he gave them their own desire. They were not estranged from their lust. While their meat was yet in their mouths, the wrath of God was upon them, and slew the fattest of them, and smote down the chosen men of Israel. Okay. Why the chosen men? They're the leaders. They should have been leading people to do the right thing. Wrath comes on them first. But let's look at this. We already talked about this east and south wind as dust. Notice the expression. The sand of the sea. Kind of like he promised to make, have a seed like an earthly seed like the sand of the sea. Okay. It fell in the midst of their camp round about their habitations. We already talked about that. They're notice he gave their own desire. He gave them what they wished for. Because why? They were not estranged from their desires. They had not separated themselves from desiring the things of the world. I mean, look, this can apply to a lot of things. Like, let's look at music. I showed in a previous lesson, the Bible definition of holy music is what? They played all kinds of instruments and sang the words of God. Well, even today we'll call music that's not, quote, religious, secular music. Well, what's secular mean? It literally means of the world. But we're told, do not love the world or the things of the world. And those things, and the essence of those things, the philosophy of the world, spell out the pride, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. In secular music, that's all they sing about. Look at their lyrics. Well, we're supposed to be estranged from our desire for those things. Christians have no business going to, say, a Taylor Swift concert. We're supposed to be estranged from those things, separated from we shouldn't be desiring the things of the world. But people do. And that's what they did. They desired what they were familiar with, what they knew in Egypt. God was providing for them. They could have ate lamb and beef, and whatever else they brought with them. Goat. And who knows? They may have had some chickens, It's not impossible at all. Because Egypt had chickens they got in trade from India. Well, whatever they brought with them, they could have eaten that sometimes. So, they're just a little tired of manna, or to go with their manna or whatever. No, but they were lazy. I mean, they were just lazy. And it kind of reminds me, I'm out here visiting. I'm out visiting some people, and out here where I'm at, out here, I sell this land. I'm on this island, and there's all this land out here that could be cultivated. And Solomon said the uncultivated land of the poor, there's much food. Well, that's certainly true out here where I'm at. And they have trees that bear fruit, and no one even bears fruit, bears things you can eat, and no one even harvests them. But instead, they'll go in the grocery store and pay an expensive price compared to where I'm used to for the same thing they could harvest themselves. But it's all cut up for them and everything. And a lot of them only work 6 hours a day. They're lazy. I'm out here in Hawaii, and a lot of the natives and the people who live among them have become the same way. They're just kind of lazy, and food's super expensive, and they could grow their own. They could be self-sufficient if a hurricane or something came. Well, that's the same thing you see right here. We've seen right here. They're lazy, and notice slew the fattest of them. Now, yes, we use that expression like living large, whatever. Sometimes fat does mean that ideal of having more than enough, being prosperous. But in this case, it also has the ideal of gluttony. Okay, I mean, you eat too fast, food will they're not eating a lot of food. They're eating it fast, and they're eating that fast, and that will cause you to GERDs, and that'll cause what you're eating to end up in your nostrils, and cause you to choke to death, or can cause you to choke to death. That's the mechanism God's wrath used upon them. he used the thing they wanted to bring their destruction. So so we're so we're warned. So we're warned about them. We're warned not to do what they did. For us to for us not to whine and complain when God has us do something or brings change in our life and it's inconvenient. I mean, having to get up in the middle of the night and move your entire house would be inconvenient. Your entire house would be inconvenient. As I said before, me and my wife did that. I moved 17 times in 5 years, and I never heard her complain one time. We never complained about it. We just trusted God was in charge. But a lot of people would. And God is, again, not sympathetic to you. Okay. He's telling you to do it. He's not, it wasn't convenient for Joseph and Mary to run off to Egypt. God provided for them, but it wasn't convenient. It wasn't convenient for them to go to Bethlehem, when her pregnant. But, the Romans said, you're going. God said, obey the civil rulers. So they went. So stop your whining and kvetching. Okay. Use a Yiddish word. Just stop it. Because if you do that, here's what's going to happen to you in 1 Corinthians. If you do that and continue to, here's what's going to happen to you, as Paul spells out in 1 Corinthians, Shaul, the Apostle Paul, so in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 5 through 6. Many of them God was not well pleased. They were overthrown in the wilderness. Now, these are examples of the intent we should not lust after evil things they also lusted. Okay, again, as I said, God was not sympathetic to them at all. He wasn't well pleased with them. And those things are our examples. He's not going to be well pleased with us either. If we're complaining about what he provided, and why, maybe he's calling someone to go to some foreign country and everything they know, all the convenient food they got, except is not even available. They can't even eat anything like what they're used to. Don't you be whining about it. Or it may not even be there. He just may have you move. He may have you move to a different part of, if you're in the U.S., different part of the U.S. Maybe a lot of things unfamiliar. He may have you. He may have you move. He may have you move suddenly, and it may not be physically. He may have you move like I did in the job. And every job, I go to these jobs, and sometimes I was just there a few days. Sometimes I was there for a number of years, as I mentioned before. I never complained about it. I trusted God instead, because I know if I complain, God's not going to be well pleased. He's not going to be sympathetic. He's not going to be like, oh, poor, he's not going to be like, oh, really, that was kind of harsh of me. I should have gave you some notice. Nah. Nah. So don't complain. And what led to their complaining? What was the root of it? Lusting after evil things. Now, why were those things evil? Was it evil to eat clean fish? Tilapia is clean. Was it evil or vegetables evil? No, they're evil because in this context, because they were whining about what the world had to offer that God wasn't giving them at that time. Okay, so it was evil because they were desiring things that they were used to instead of appreciating the things God had provided. And that made them evil. But we can actually, again, desire after evil things that are actually evil, like I before I'd mentioned, like secular music. They did desire after evil things as well. We've seen where they, the golden calf incident, etc. Okay. Now, every good trap has attractive bait. If you have a mouse trap, people often would put cheddar cheese on it. Got a little bit of smell. The mouse can smell it. Now you can catch mice without it, but you do a lot more effective if you put the cheddar on there. Well, the mouse smells the cheddar. Now, there's nothing wrong with the cheddar by itself for the mouse, but it's on this mouse trap. And now he smells it, and then he moves in, sniffs it out, maybe fills it with his whiskers, aware of it, starts nibbling on it. Eventually, that nibbling snaps the trap, the kill bar comes over, and he's dead. That's what we're being warned about here. Overthrown means destroyed. Okay. We must not complain what God has because he knows better than us. Yeah, that cheddar may not have anything wrong with it, but that cheddar is going to bring our death. Or maybe the cheddar is something that's evil altogether and it's going to bring us death. Either way, we do not complain, trust God, and thank Him in everything. That's the lesson we're to learn from all this, as Joel the Apostle Paul wrote here. Now, we're going to finish up with some more words from him. What are we to do instead? 1 Timothy 8, 9, 6, 8 through 9. Having food and raiment, let's therein be content. But they that be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. Okay. Having food and raiment, let us therewith be content. Now, that word raiment, the Greek word means covering. It means clothing and shelter. Okay. It's not in that sense. It's used in the Hebrew word, where the same Greek words used in the Septuagint, translated the same Greek word, also means food covering, literally food and as the idea of food and shelter. So having food, clothing, and shelter, let's be content. How do we do that? Our contentment's in God. He is our contentment. He is my contentment. I mean, as long as I have that, I'm good. If he wants me to minister something, if he wants to do some ministry and I need something, he'll give me that. But my contentment's not in things. Now, he's not saying those that are rich will fall into temptation. It's those that will be rich. Those that are desiring to be rich. Why? Because the cheddar is money, okay? And why they want the money? Because they're not content with food, clothing, and shelter. Their contentment's not in him. Often they got something. Well, I want this thing. Well, I want the money to get the thing I want. Then I'll be content and happy and whatever. No, they won't, because their contentment's not in God, and they're gonna fall into temptation, just like that mouse smelling that cheese, and it's a snare, a trap. And just like we saw the words of Solomon, the bird goes into the trap not knowing it's going to cost him his life. Well, so it is with them. That cheddar money is going to be a temptation to them, and a snare. The problem with the money, it's that they're not content with what God's provided, and now lead them into foolish and hurtful lusts, and this desires, hurtful desires, and foolish. Like, people get money, start acting funny. Like, okay, now suddenly they think, oh well, I gotta have my wife's not good enough. I gotta go find, I might have her, keep her because I like my kids or whatever, but I got some of the world thinks is better looking on my side, to show up with me, an escort or whatever. And that woman's real intention is to get some of the money. So now she's going to try to pull him into a sexual relationship with her, as we saw in the word of Solomon. Okay. Summary of a lot of what Solomon says about women is this. If a woman wants to have sex with you, is willing to have sex or wants to have sex with you, and she's not married to you, it's a trap. You can just take that to the bank. But it doesn't have to be just sexual desire. Desiring this thing, desiring that thing, pull them away from the things of God. As I mentioned earlier, caught in the cares of this world, and not watching and praying, and going through the tribulation. That's a really very real possibility for people. That's a hurtful desire. So that lust is going to bring him in, and ultimately in destruction. What's the difference between destruction and perdition? Destruction is about their body being death, but perdition is often used about hell, eternal separation from God. And who's he writing this to? Believers. Believers don't need to be going around desiring to be rich. God makes you rich for his purposes, great. But when you've made money into an idol, it's going to be a temptation, a snare. It can ultimately lead to your death, can lead to the death of your body, and the destruction of your soul in hell. Don't be nibbling on the cheddar. Like, and and don't be desiring the things you left behind when you started following Messiah. Appreciate what God's giving you today. Trust Him; He's taking care of you, even when you're living in a tent, which were some of my happiest days. That's all I have until next week. Shalom.